Well, all right. Well, welcome back to Health Made Easy. I'm your host, Dr. Jason Jones, and super excited today because we have a returning guest from 2015, Miss Amber Romaniuk. Am I saying that correctly?
Close, Romaniuk.
Yeah, there we go. That's pretty good from a good old boy from Alabama. So
Yes.
yeah, not too bad, not too bad. Yeah, I took 2 years of French, and literally I got 5 words. That's about all I. So, but she is going to really enlighten us today on a topic that I don't think we've even covered on here before. We're going to be talking about stress. We're going to be talking about emotional eating and a few other things as well. But before we get into that, Amber, what I wanted you to do, because it's been a while since you've been on, is just kind of reintroduce yourself, kind of who you are, what you do, and then we'll get right into the material.
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely.
So I am an emotional eating, digestive, and hormone expert, and I really specialize in helping primarily women. I've supported men as well, but women who are struggling with emotional eating, food addiction, gut and hormone issues, body image struggles, worthiness struggles, because it all stems from unworthiness. And so I've had my business for almost 8 years now. I can't believe it was already 6 years ago that we did the first interview. Time flies.
Yeah.
Um, and where this, really came from for me was going through my own personal struggle with food addiction, with emotional eating, using food to numb and distract myself from my reality because I didn't know how to cope with stress. I didn't know how to cope with my emotions. I was critical of my body. So it really all started for me from a very young age and just evolved into a very severe food addiction in my early 20s, which really food addiction is like you're obsessing about food all the time. You can't stop thinking about it. You're always losing control with it and binging or overeating to the point where you're sick. And then you're trying to have extreme control and like diet and restrict and like, gain that control to try and control your weight and your body. And so once I addressed that and spent a few years, really healing my body and overcoming it, it really made me think how many people are struggling with this, whether worse than me, the same as I did, or maybe it's more minor, but it has a significant impact on every area of your life.
Yeah.
It impacts your confidence. I really had a lack mentality and I was like always struggling with money. I didn't want to like date anybody because I was like too embarrassed and didn't feel good enough. Like my health was a nightmare. I had the worst digestive issues and my hormones were, for being 22, 23, like my hormones were a nightmare.
Mm.
Right. So there's like all these things all these imbalances, I guess you could say, that I caused by being in this behavior. And so as I started to share my story with other people, they started opening up and sharing theirs. And it really actually shocked me that almost everyone that I had talked to had described some similar experience to me. And that's what really inspired me to go, wow, I really want to help people with this. I have the brain of the addict and, the experiences that they've gone through. I really think that, they can relate. And I think that that's one of the biggest pieces is the relatability factor and people know they can come to me and they can feel safe and comfortable and there's no judgment or like extreme forcing of anything. It's like really just walking with people where they're at to gain this healing. So that's, long story short, like what's brought me to here where I am now. And 8 years later, continuing to grow and do my deeper work. I haven't had any issues with binge eating for like 10 years now, which is so
Wow.
nice, because it was really all consuming through, my teens and 20s, early 20s. So it's really nice to be in a place where food is nourishment and I can enjoy mindful indulgence, but there's no like guilt or negative associations anymore.
Yeah. So you said so many things in that, and I wanted to ask you, when you talk to all of the people that you've either coached or just sort of had a conversation with that basically told a very similar story to yours or some version of it,
Mhm.
did you find a common denominator where in there where it was like self-esteem or like addiction, or were there certain tendencies that maybe set people up to have emotional eating and binging and those kinds of things?
Definitely. And I'm glad that you bring that up because there are a couple of key common denominators I find.
Okay.
So I'll kind of highlight, I think there's three. So the first one definitely is conditioning that we all received from a very young age, whether it was from the parents putting the child on a diet, poking at their stomach, making fun of their weight, criticizing them, convincing them they'd have to, look a certain way, and the food habits that were created, bringing the child up. I think that part plays a huge role from an environment standpoint. And then the second aspect of the conditioning was the content that we consumed. So as an example, from a very young age, putting the television on and watching music videos and movies and reading, teen magazines, all I'm seeing are these women with these like flat stomachs and these quote unquote perfect looking bodies, right? And I'm going, well, I don't look like that. What's wrong with me? Like, if this is what I have to look like to be successful and have money and love, et cetera, like, wow. And then boom, there goes the self-esteem, right?
Yeah.
And the criticism and the comparison. So the conditioning from the media and magazines and Hollywood has a significant impact on us. So there's the media and the environment conditioning, and then that plays into the self-worth. So if we are taught and conditioned from a very young age that unless you fit a certain mold and you look a certain way, you're not good enough, well, then here comes the diet culture and like, oh, you just need to eat less and exercise more, do this diet, the diets of the stars, Oprah's endorsing this, blah, blah, blah. And at the time, like when you're idolizing these people, you think, wow, like that must be what I need to do, because you don't know how to think for yourself and you don't know how to discern, right? When you're 11 and 12 and again, you're in this conditioning. And so then the diets start and the restriction starts and that whole evolution of counting calories and then it not working and going back and starting to eat all the things you didn't allow yourself to have really evolve. So I find that this is really a big piece for a lot of the women that I connect with is the unworthiness gets conditioned into us. We're born unconditionally loving ourselves, but we get conditioned. And then their parental experiences. And then, of course, the diet thing is shoved down our throats by lots of doctors and nutritionists and like everybody. And so I find then what ends up happening is a lot of people grow up with just unhealthy relationships with food because they are so convinced that they have to, hit a certain weight or look a certain way for their life to finally be good enough. And so they're constantly chasing that with restriction, with eating styles, with over exercising, and never learning how to listen to their bodies. And so the more they diet and restrict, and then the binging happens, the more they disconnect from themselves because their gut health gets worse, their hormones get worse, they physically feel unwell, they're tired, right? And then the weight just keeps coming back, and that just kills more confidence. So that's kind of the picture that I see, but it starts with that unworthiness and all the conditioning we've received.
Okay, yeah, and that makes total sense. And and I'm sure that those factors, can lead to similar experiences, but they may manifest themselves as something different. Like in a guy.
Oh yeah.
You might not have that situation happen, but it's like very similar, but then it'll turn into something else.
Yeah. Muscles, like addiction could be with food, but it could be alcohol. It could be, using technology like binging on Netflix to like numb yourself from your reality. Like men are taught you can't feel and you're weak if you express your emotions. So that's mass conditioning that men receive that is so unfair, right? That can cause a lot of issues with different kinds of self-sabotaging behaviors as well.
Yeah, well, and then because then they go into a relationship, and they bring all of that stuff,
Yes.
with them, and God help those that where they bring it from both sides, and it's going to be a real struggle. So as you see it, and sort of because I know you very much view things the way I do, it's like you have to get down to like the cause, of something. So when you start to put the pieces back together with someone, coach them, start the repair and the rebuild process, like what's step number one? Like what does that person need to work through, work on, or fix, if you will, to get them going?
Yeah, I find the first step is being willing to dedicate time to do the work. Because if you're rushing along and you're overbooking your schedule and you're trying to overachieve, again, based on your unworthiness and the need to prove, and you don't take time, nothing's really going to change. So opening up time to do the work, to build a routine where you're slowing down and sitting and eating your food without distractions, where you're doing mindful movement, where you're going to bed and getting enough sleep, where you are doing some kinds of self-care to cope with your emotions in a healthy way. So whilst they're building this routine bit by bit, the other key thing is starting to be aware of the different triggers, the emotional eating triggers that they're dealing with. And it'd be no different if it was alcohol or smoking or whatever. It's just different substances.
Yeah.
And so identifying, what emotional stressors trigger emotional eating, what habitual behaviors trigger emotional eating, which foods, right? And which, cravings, lack of sleep, didn't eat enough today. Like there's so many different things that can trigger emotional eating. And so it's important that they become aware of that so that they can start to catch the triggers when they come up. And before they just go to food, they can stop and actually ask themselves, is this physical hunger? Do I actually need to physically nourish my body? Or is this something emotional? Because I define emotional eating as any reason for eating other than physical nourishment.
Mm.
So, emotional eating doesn't just mean I eat when I'm sad or I eat when I'm, angry. You could be bored. It could be association with TV and eating, working and eating. Like that to me is all emotional because it's mindless and you're not paying attention just as
Yeah.
much as the emotional triggers are.
Yeah. And it could be habitual too, right? Like just sort of like
Yes.
at this time of the evening, it's like you train yourself to, that's when I have, the cookie or the ice cream or
Yeah.
or I have dinner number two, or whatever that it may be, from there.
It's true because you wire this pattern in your brain. Every time you repeat a pattern, doesn't matter if it's supportive or not supportive of your health, you literally ingrain it in your brain. And then every day around that time, that neural pathway is lighting up going, it's time for you to do this. It's time for you to do this. So even though you may not want to, there's such a strong pull that it's hard to resist it.
Yeah. And what's an average sort of rewiring time frame on something like that? I mean, because the old adage is 21 days, and I think we all know that's not true. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. Honestly, like I definitely see if women are really ready to show up or whoever, if anyone's really ready to show up and do the deeper work, I've seen people stop the behaviors with binging, emotional eating and binging and purging in like a month and a half. And
Mm,
then for some people, it takes like a year. It really depends how intensive it is, how deep it is. And each person, gains awareness at their own pace. I do find the average amount of time someone is coming to me is about a year to a year and a half. And that's because the ego has been in control their whole lives. That self-sabotaging mindset that keeps telling them they're not good enough. The conditioning goes so deep, right? It takes time to repair the physical body, to work on the mental, emotional. And then with a lot of my clients, I'm now going into the more spiritual aspects of like energy and empaths and, people who like take on other people's stuff because they get more sensitive. And I, want people to know how to manage that because
mhm.
if you're having a conversation with someone and they're dumping everything on you and then you go home and you're overwhelmed and that triggers you to emotionally eat, you need to know how to manage that.
Yeah.
So it's really cool to see how people take their power back when they do this deeper work and let go of the conditioning. And then they no longer are idolizing these false, illusory idols that really don't care about us, right? And just are
Yeah.
in it to make a lot of money. Like they take their power back and go, no, I'm not, giving my power away to that anymore. I don't want to have anything to do with that, which is super cool to see.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great. And one of the things I talk about all the time is like healing just takes time and repetition.
Mm.
You know what I mean? It's
Hmm.
just like building new pathways is not particularly easy, but it's not difficult either. It's just
Yeah.
it can be very simple. And really, it's just sort of like doing these mundane things just over and over and over. And then you just start to gain momentum. It's like getting those little wins, sort of as you
Yeah.
go, because we're all our own greatest experiment.
Hmm.
Just like I think we're our we're our greatest asset, but we're also our greatest like enemy,
Hmm.
as well. So yeah, I really want to get into a couple of things. So if someone's listening to this and they're like, I don't know if I do that or not,
Hmm.
what are some of the, I would say, more stereotypical or common like signs and symptoms of like emotional eating? What would they
Yeah.
look like?
Definitely. So, likely you're someone who is thinking about food on a regular basis in the sense of like, oh, I have to eat clean today. I've got to stick to my diet today. Like if I do good today, like then maybe when I get on the scale tomorrow, I will have dropped some weight. So there's usually some correlation to the weight because their worth is associated to happiness and being good enough.
Hmm.
And then there's the other voice that's going, oh, but you should totally just eat that chocolate, eat the chips, eat the ice cream, because the ego wants to push you into that self-sabotage. So there's some kind of justification. So there's this constant fight going back and forth in your head. And at some point you just get tired of it and you just give in, because whilst you've convinced yourself it's because you don't have the willpower, it's just because these patterns are so strong.
Yeah.
You're constantly going from diets and restriction and then falling off because they're not attainable. And then you're going and overeating and gorging on all of the foods that you weren't allowing yourself to have. You may be someone who's likely weighing in daily or multiple days a week because you're trying to really control your weight because you're feeling insecure with your body. Maybe you're over exercising and you feel guilty if you take a day off. You feel guilty if you eat processed foods or if you have something that's not on your meal plan. Like there's usually that guilt associated afterward, followed by the all or nothing mentality, which is like, well, screw it. I already ate that ice cream. So I'm going to just throw the towel in for the rest of the day or the rest of the week. So that is very prominent as well. And then another sign is often you are somebody who's not even aware of, like, you've just eaten a meal because you're not present, you're multitasking, and then you finish it and you look down at your plate and go, oh my gosh, I'm still hungry, what else can I pick away at? So those are some common kind of signs and behaviors that I notice people struggling with who are dealing with emotional eating.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's really any reason for eating other than physical nourishment. So something that people can do to start to build awareness is, before you go to the cupboard, before you go and eat and get that urge, can you stop, get out of the kitchen and ask yourself, am I really physically hungry?
Okay.
When's the last time I ate? Do I really need to eat?
Yeah. And would that also be true for some of the other things that you said? Because you mentioned, weighing yourself, making sure you stick to your diet plan, or meal, food plan,
Yeah.
whatever that is, all of which I think can be very healthy things to do, because you're sort of quantifying, you're tracking, just like somebody would track their blood work, or something like that. So as long as, would you say it's okay to do those things, as long as it's very purposeful and it's not driven by your emotions and kind of out of control? Am I saying, is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah, to be honest with you, anyone who's struggling with any kind of emotional relationship with food, I suggest gets off of diets, counting, and following meal plans, because at some point, something triggers the rebellion of rebelling away from the diet or the meal plan. And I find these things only incite more rules, restrictions, and make the person feel like, oh my gosh, like I have to follow this. And today I don't want to eat that. Today I don't want to have this thing. I want to have something else. And so, in my experience, I've only ever seen that fuel more self-sabotage, maybe for the odd person or certain people that works, but not really anyone in my world. So, what I prefer to do is to teach people how to listen to their bodies, to look at your meals and snacks and make sure you're eating enough. Getting
Okay.
enough protein, fat, good healthy carbohydrates, fruits and vegetables, starchy root vegetables, a lot of my clients have gluten sensitivity, so gluten-free grains, etc. But
Hmm.
we're not restricting, we're not following a certain plan, because at some point it triggers them to rebel. Even elimination diets with food sensitivity tests, I get a lot of women coming to me going, my ND did this test, I'm sensitive to 30 foods. She's told me I have to cut them all out. And they're like, I'm so overwhelmed. I can't stop binging because it's not realistic or attainable.
Yeah.
And so I'm seeing that kind of thing as well. So that's why it's important to overcome emotional eating without any kind of restriction. Learn how to listen to your body and what foods feel good in your body. And when you can stop when you're full, you don't need to know what kind of portion you need, because your body will tell you, and you can move on.
Okay.
Right. So that's the focus I like to take. That may not feel like it works for some people, but I don't want people to feel like they need control. I want them to build mindfulness, because what is below control is fear and insecurity.
Gotcha. Yeah. So let's say there's a person that they have trouble with emotional eating.
Mhm.
It would be wise for them, health wise, and they want to lose weight, you know, are you looking more to sort of just balance things out so that their weight normalizes? That's kind of, I guess that's maybe what I would call it. Or is there a strategy that you use to, not only help them achieve the goals that they have, but also get past the emotional eating as well?
So yeah, ultimately when people are coming to me, they're really frustrated with their weight and or emotional eating. So it's actually about taking the focus off of the weight and understanding, why is my body putting the weight on? Because the weight is a protective mechanism. So why is my body needing to
Mm,
protect with this weight? And it's often because the body doesn't feel safe, because with the overeating and the processed foods and the binging and the emotional eating, that puts so much stress on the body. And then the person's going to restriction, which stresses out the body. And then there are negative self-talk, which our cells are listening to our thoughts, and that will make the body go into a stress response. And then you throw in the gut issues, the inflammation, the hormone imbalances, the poor sleep, the overbooked schedule. Like, the body goes,
like,
my last priority is weight loss. Like, there are so many things that I'm trying to sort out, and you're not helping me out at all. So
yeah,
like, I've got to just protect, protect, protect. So to me, first step's always addressing emotional eating and opening up time to do the work. However, it's helping the person understand why they're hanging on. So let's look at the hormones. Let's look at the inflammation and the gut issues also. Let's look at the emotional mindset piece of what may have happened to you when you were younger. Like, one example quickly is a client who, her mom would often get home late from work, like shortly after her daughter arrived home. And so she'd be at home on her own for a little while, and it just got ingrained in her to eat when she got home. And so when we were working on this piece, that's when the weight came off for her after dealing with the other aspects, because subconsciously her body's like, well, no, like, if I don't feel safe, if I don't have this protection, because I was abandoned when I was younger.
oh,
So it happens in different ways for different people, but the ultimate goal is that by the time the person comes to love and respect their body, the weight loss isn't really a concern anymore. But then the beauty is, it just falls off effortlessly without them even having to do anything, because they've addressed the different stressors physically, mentally, and emotionally.
yeah, wow. Yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, it does make total sense because then the body understands and recognizes it's just unnecessary, and
Yeah.
it can just let go,
Yeah.
of it. That's really cool stuff. That is really cool. How big of a problem in emotional eating is like comparison? You know what I mean? Like, they're just sort of like people just comparing themselves. You kind of mentioned that earlier, kind of like with the teen
Mhm.
magazines and those kinds of things. But sort of as we get older, I'm thinking that doesn't really go away. I'm thinking, that's got to play in there somewhere.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't go away. And I definitely find with social media, I think it's actually been amplified. Not only that, but you have like the CGI, computer generated imaging, the photoshopping, like you can edit any frame of video or photo, and you don't see anyone putting a disclaimer going, oh, by the way, I've completely altered myself. And like, this isn't the real me, but I need to sell a product. So, here's this fake reality, fake body, whatever it is. And so, I think that's where it can make it easier to compare yourself, whether it's like your neighbor who's like sharing all their healthier meals, and it's making you feel like you're a bad parent because you're not able to like do that as good as they can. Or, wow, look at them, they're always traveling, and like, look at her, she had 3 kids and like her body is so good. Or look at that public figure, whatever. So it does play a huge role. And because we spend so much time on technology, unless we have good boundaries, it's often in our face, let alone then going out in public and
Yeah.
seeing it in public as well. So the powerful thing is as you build your self-worth and your inner confidence, the comparison actually stops. You can look at that and go, good for that person, good for me. Or you can actually spot the editing. And
Hmm.
it's not that you go and judge the person, but it's just like, that's fake. I know
Yeah.
it's fake. Moving on. And there's no worrying or judgment or then picking yourself apart and then punishing yourself with food or another diet. So that's the ultimate goal, but it is very, very, very prominent. I do think all of these Snapchat filters and the things that people can use to alter their face is a huge problem. You're seeing kids as young as 5 going to their parents and going like, why do I only look like this when this is here? I want to look like this all the time. hearing about women taking pictures of themselves with the filters and their eyes being bigger, whatever parts of their face are different, going to plastic surgeons and saying, can you make my eyes bigger? Like that's unfortunately how deep the brainwashing, I think it really is going with this on a psychological level. I personally believe that it was all planned like that for a reason, because the more broken down you are, the more insecure you are, the easier you are to manipulate and control, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But I do think we're seeing more people realize that and learn how to take their power back and disconnect from that kind of stuff. But when you're insecure and you're, really hating on your body, it is so easy to give your power away to that stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, that does make total sense. Let me ask you this. I know for me, like I don't like to take anything on unless I feel like I can give it my all and be, just, not that I'm going to be the best at it or any kind of thing like that, but just sort of I just show up as my best version of myself,
Mm-hmm.
in that moment. And what I've found over the years, it's so much less about what I'm going to be doing, um, compared to what I'm not going to do anymore,
Mm-hmm.
and the things I'm going to give up so that I can be the best version of myself. Do you see that with your clients? Like they have so much scattered energy, and they're putting so much emphasis and doing these things and signing up to be on committees and
Mm-hmm.
doing all these things in the grand scheme of things, which take up a lot of time and really are
Yeah.
really distracting. They don't do anything for them. Do you see them having to shed those kinds of things so that they can like implement a program, like you do?
Sometimes it usually doesn't start out that way. And the great thing usually is they start to realize how much all of these extra commitments don't serve them. And they decide on their own, wow, like that doesn't feel good anymore. I'm going to quit that. I'm going to stop that. I'm going to shelf that, postpone it. I'm going to, start saying no. I'm going to start asking for help. I'm going to start setting healthy boundaries, because as they start to feel better, they want to protect that. And how do you do that? By
Yeah,
not people pleasing, by not needing to prove your worth,
yeah,
by setting healthy boundaries to go, I'm going to protect this work that I'm doing. By all means, I never say to people like, you have to quit doing this or whatever. Like it ultimately, they just organically decide it for themselves because they see the scattered energy. They start to feel it and understand how it's triggering the emotional eating and the hormone imbalances and the fatigue or whatever they're struggling with.
yeah.
So ultimately, they do really end up simplifying more.
Hmm.
But the ego in the beginning is like, yeah, right. Like, I'm not going to really change anything. So it's the experience of actually feeling the shift that inspires it. Because
Yeah,
a lot of people that first come to me, they're like go-getters, perfectionists, like, but they do it to the point where they're literally so sick that their business is making them sick. So an example is like, I had a client who owned a health and wellness center, and she's like never sleeping. She's always answering emails. The business is essentially running her, and she is, gaining so much weight and in the hospital every other month because she's catching every cold and flu and needs to be on like IV antibiotics for a month, and is right. Like, so it's like she's built this health and wellness business, but she's the one that's like suffering because she has been a perfectionist and like put her worth into the business, which is a very unwise thing to do because it was costing her health big time. And
yeah,
she was only in her, like, she was quite young. So when she started to realize that she had built such an unhealthy dynamic with her business and it was all from her unworthiness, she actually sold the business because she's like, I don't want to die, essentially. Like, I need the time to do this work. So those are some of the breakthroughs that happen. Not that people need to sell their businesses, but you
yeah,
come to these like answers of just knowing what you need.
yeah. And that makes total sense. That's interesting that you brought up that example because like I was in a space like that, at one time, and I just so happened to be in a men's group where we would read like these, leadership books and those kinds of things. Like we'd meet every week and discuss them and everything, and then I always knew I was a bit of a perfectionist, and I call myself like a recovering perfectionist, and I learned that it was a really great thing to have, but it was like the best thing about me, but it was also the worst thing about me. But once I sort of understood that and go, okay, I do need to use that tool that I have and that talent over here in this area, but over
Yeah.
here it doesn't make any difference whatsoever. You know what I mean? And I can just let that go. It's just like it's like everything changed. It was like a
Hmm.
huge shift, in there. And I'm sure you see that with your folks, and you probably see, I would imagine, like their personal power go up when they start having those kinds of shifts, like you talked about
Yeah.
with that person, and their confidence, and self-esteem, and just motivation and discipline and all those things just start to like take off.
Yeah, and the biggest thing that happens is their decisions are no longer being made out of fear and desperation because I put my validation in others and put my worth in other people. Now they're going, I know I'm good enough. I have the confidence and the power. So I don't need to try to overachieve with this thing. Yes, I'm motivated. Yes, I have goals, but I'm not at the expense of my health and well-being going to throw myself under the bus because I have something to prove. I have
Yeah,
nothing to prove. I want my health and well-being, and I want the successful business and the abundance and the healthy relationship. I need to be in balance though in order to be able to show up in those other areas.
absolutely. And that, I think that kind of goes into um, like my next question, which is because you do deal with so many people that come to you that do want to lose weight. What are like a lot of times I think, well, because I think you use the word weight blocks, like things that just
Mhm.
block your ability to like let it go.
Yeah.
Are there like a top three, top five, weight blocks that people have that, it's probably like a blind spot for them. Like
Mm.
they just can't see it, and you sitting on the outside, you're just like, there it is,
Yeah.
right there. What are those things?
Yeah. So I'd say the top five, the unhealthy relationship with food, the emotional eating to the restriction,
Mhm.
um, psychologically and unconsciously or subconsciously rather being in a place where you don't believe you ever are worthy to let go of it and you're constantly like focusing on that it will never change because what you focus on grows, right? So if you're
Yep.
focusing on what you don't want, you attract that. And then definitely inflammation. They all have such intensive inflammation because of the stress they're putting on their body with food, calendar, all that kind of stuff. And then specifically hormone imbalances. So the ones that I see being the most impactful are underactive thyroid because the metabolism just shuts down. They stop eating enough because they don't
Yeah.
think they need to eat because they're not hungry. And then of course it's easier to gain weight when your thyroid isn't functioning properly. Adrenal fatigue, especially cortisol being far too high, just the body goes into that fight or flight response and retains more water, inflames more, and the body's just going, I don't feel safe. I need to hang on. And then a lot of estrogen dominance. So as soon as I have a client who's in really
Oh,
elevated estrogen dominance, like it's just not coming off. I went through that. How does that happen? Well, it's pretty easy. You binge eat, cortisol goes up, progesterone goes down, estrogen goes up. So those are some of the biggest blocks that I see. And notice how it's not just physical, it's the behavioral and the mindset piece as well.
yeah. That makes total sense. So I know that we're getting short on time, and I know that our listeners are curious about, okay, so I'm there, that's
Mhm.
me. I don't know what in the world to do. I've gotten some super tips for today, but there's really like I don't see me doing it on my own, type of
Mhm.
a thing. So tell me the best way for like our folks to connect with you, because your website is awesome. You got recipes and just so many different things on there, and strategies to like help people, but you also have your coaching and being able to work with people. What's the best way for people to get a hold of you? Is it through your website? Is it on Facebook?
Yeah, and thank you. It's yeah, my website, so amberapproved.ca. You can learn more about what I do, my story. I have a free emotional eating quiz there. I
Hmm.
offer a 30-minute complimentary body freedom call. So if you want to connect and have a conversation around what you've been going through and talk about what it could be like to work together, that's a great place to go. You can also listen to all my podcast episodes there, the No Sugarcoating podcast, where I dive deep, like we did today, into different conversations around these things. And then, yeah, lots of recipes to access as well, especially if you're suspecting you have inflammation or you want to try something different or you've had to go gluten free or whatever that is. So that's the best place to find me. And then, as far as social media is concerned, I'm the most active on Instagram, and it's my first and last name. So Amber, Romaniuk. just posting a lot of content, doing a lot of Instagram lives and stuff like that. So if you want to catch me live and ask a question, usually I do those on Fridays.
Okay, cool. And then one last question. Do I have trouble with emotional eating if every time I see a picture of the food you post on Instagram, like I want to have that?
No, see, I think that to me is like, oh, wow, that looks appealing. The colors look nice. I want to eat it, but it doesn't mean you necessarily want to sit down and eat it all. If you want to sit down and eat it all, maybe there's
Maybe
a
so.
struggle with emotional eating. Yeah.
I gotcha. I gotcha. Because I'm like, I don't know who takes those pictures, but they are amazing. And then it looks amazing, and just like all the ingredients and everything. I'm like, wow. I'm like, I
Well,
need to be
thank
eating like
you.
that every single day. It's really, really super incredible. So, Amber, thank you so much. I'm so glad we reconnected, and did this podcast again. But I just want to say thank you for just, just being vulnerable to like tell your story and then turn that into like your passion, and your life's work, to serve other people who, are basically coming from the same place you were, to actually, get them on the other side of it as well and help them succeed. So I just think that's really just so incredible. And I just appreciate you so much for coming on today and doing the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. And thank you so much. It's honestly the best thing I had to go through. And, just to let people know they're not alone and you can make the change as well. So anything's possible.